You now know almost all the things Chopper has to offer, which you'll need on a daily basis. Sending requests, obtaining responses, adding interceptors. There is only one thing missing which will plug a hole in a clean coder's heart, and that is type safety. JSON itself is not type safe, we'll have to live with it. However, we can make our code a lot more readable and less error prone if we ditch dynamic data for some real data types. Chopper offers an amazing way to convert request and response data with the help of a library of your own choice. And our choice, at least for this tutorial, will be BuiltValue. Hello, welcome to ResoCoder, where you are getting prepared for real app development by building better, faster, more stable apps. So subscribe and hit the bell if you want to grow your coding skills. While you can integrate Chopper with any kind of a library or even write your own code which will parse dynamic data and turn it into something type safe, we are going to use BuiltValue because BuiltValue is arguably the best choice when you want to create immutable data classes with all the bells and whistles like copying and value equality and so on. And on top of that, BuiltValue has a first-class JSON serialization support. And to learn more about this library in depth, check out the tutorial from the card in the corner. Of course, I'm going to explain the most important concepts also in this tutorial, but you should really take a deeper look at this library because it's totally awesome. And be sure to check out the written tutorial from the link in the description, where you can also find all of the code written in this video and links to the libraries, and overall you can learn at your own pace. Let's jump right to it. The first step in making type-safe code is to actually import the BuiltValue library. So let's go to pubspec.yaml and let's add BuiltValue dependency. But before we do that, we are going to update the Chopper version, which now is at 2.4.2, and also update Chopper generator to 2.4.2, just so that we use the latest version. Of course, in the future, the version number may be completely different, but the basics should remain working nevertheless. So let's add BuiltValue by using pubspec assist extension for VS Code, and to find out which extensions you should be absolutely using as a Flutter developer for VS Code, check out the tutorial from the card in the corner. So let's add a dependency using pubspec assist, and we want to add BuiltValue. We want to add the first one, so regular BuiltValue, but also BuiltValue works by source generation, much like Chopper itself. So we also want to add another thing over here, which will be BuiltValue, but this time generator. And of course, we want to move the generator over to the dev dependencies. And now let's save pubspec.yaml file. Alright, so throughout this series, we've been creating an app for viewing posts from the JSON placeholder API. And let's just take a little brief refresher, just so you know what that data looks like. Whenever we request data from the posts endpoint, the response will contain the following JSON, which contains a list of objects, and each of these post objects contains user ID, ID, title, and the body. We are interested in all of these fields except for the user ID. So the class which we are about to create will have ID, title, and body properties or fields. Let's now create a build post class, and we're going to create it inside a new folder under lib. So let's right click, new folder, and let's call it model. And into it, we are going to add a new file, call it buildpost.dart. And buildPost will have to be an abstract class because that's just how BuiltValue works. BuiltValue works by generating the implementation of this abstract class inside a new file which will be called buildpost.g.dart. Creating a BuiltValue class is definitely sparing you from writing all of the generated code yourself, but still it requires quite a bit of boilerplate nevertheless. I have created my own snippets for VS Code, which you can find in the written tutorial available from the link in the video description. These snippets will spare us from writing all of that boilerplate ourselves, but also, of course, you can just copy the code of the finished class. The first snippet which I am going to use is BuiltH. This is going to add all of the needed imports and also the part directive so that the code generation library can know which file contains the generated class. So let's call this part file builtPost. So builtPost.g.dart. And then another snippet is BLTS for serializable. So we're going to call this class builtPost. Now hit tab and fields go here. Before we add fields here, we actually do not want to have toJSON and fromJSON methods, which call JSON encode and JSON decode and do all of this serialization, because we are going to handle serialization a bit differently. We are going to hook into these serializers directly inside a converter for Chopper. So let's just delete toJSON and fromJSON. And once we add the fields here, I'm going to explain everything in somewhat of a detail, but you should really watch the separate tutorial on BuiltValue if you really want to learn about it in depth. The first thing here will be a nullable field, int getID. So fields are only properties in BuiltValue classes because their data will be actually stored inside the generated class, inside builtPost.g.dart file. And to make something nullable, we have to mark it with @nullable, which is definitely a nice thing from the BuiltValue. It doesn't allow nulls by default. We want this to be nullable because IDs will be set in the backend. So when we are performing a post request to the server, we do not want to necessarily set the ID. So it will be null when we are posting data to the API, but once we get data from the API, this ID will be populated with some number. That's why it should be able to be null, this ID field. And then we want to have two more properties, string get title and also string get body. So the default constructor is private in a BuiltValue class because we only want to be able to use a factory which takes in a builtPost builder and outputs the generated class builtPost. The default constructor is private so that we cannot instantiate builtPost directly without utilizing the builtPost builder. And then we have a serializer here which will be responsible for taking the data inside builtPost and serializing it into a map, which then will be later on serialized into JSON string, which then will be transferred to the server inside a request. Also, the serializer will obviously be responsible for deserializing all of that nasty dynamic data into beautiful typesafe builtPosts. Before we initiate source generation for builtPost, it's a good idea to also add serializers. That's because it turns out that just having a serializer for builtPost is not enough. There's an entire ecosystem of other serializers for types like integers, string, bool, double, and other primitives in Dart. So to successfully serialize and deserialize builtPost, our app will have to use it in conjunction with other serializers, for example, for this string or for this int. These primitives also require serialization and deserialization. And we can add our builtPost serializer into that ecosystem of other serializers by adding it to the list of all serializers. This will happen inside a new file, which we will call serializers.dart. And inside it, we want to have a part directive again, because it also works by code generation. So part, and this time it's going to be inside serializers.g.dart. And then once we have this part, we want to create final serializers. So it will be a tab level field without being nested in any kind of a class. So final serializers, and let's import it from BuiltValue. Let's import it manually actually. So import serializer from BuiltValue. So serializer.dart. So these serializers will be called serializers, and let's set them equal to something which is just how it's done with BuiltValue because of how the code is generated. So we want to have here parentheses and then access the generated serializers field, which will be inside that serializers.g.dart file. And now, once we specify its name, we want to convert it to builder. And once it's in a builder format, to this builder, we want to add a plugin. And this is really important. We want to provide a plugin here, which will be a standard JSON plugin. And let's move it to another line here so that we can see it more properly. And this standard JSON plugin, once we import it from BuiltValue standard JSON plugin, and this standard JSON plugin is important because whenever you want to use the JSON generated by this BuiltValue library with any kind of a RESTful API, you need to have the standard JSON plugin in here. That's because by default, the BuiltValue's JSON output aren't key value pairs, in other words, a map, but instead it's only a list. So what do I mean by that? Well, usually your JSON is something like this: key, colon, value. So for example, 3. Then you have key 2, and then you have another value, for example, a string title, right? But what BuiltValue does is something like this, which is what we do not want. BuiltValue by default, without this standard JSON plugin, will serialize the data into a data structure, which will be a list, and here will be key, and then 3, key 2, and then there will be title. So the keys are being followed by their values, but this is definitely not something which is a regular type of JSON, and actually it's not even a valid JSON, so we really cannot use it with JSON. You can just use it somewhere internally, but whenever you want to send data over to some real API, you have to use standard JSON plugin to format it as a standard JSON, right? And then let's just call build on all of this, and to add the build post serializer into the ecosystem of all of those other serializers, we're going to annotate this field with serializers for, and we're going to say that this should include a const list, which will contain only a single serializer for build post. So let's import build post in here, and now comes the time when we can finally run our most favorite command, which is Flutter packages pub run build runner watch. We want to watch it here because later on we are also going to change the implementation of our post API service, and if we use the watch command, build process will remain running even for when we change the post API service. Oh, and of course, if something like this happens, that you get a severe error in the source generation saying that are all the types imported, just make sure that you save the build post file by hitting Ctrl and S prior to running build source generation. So once build post file is saved, everything works correctly and we have succeeded message. So yeah, we have all of the classes generated. Let's now hop into the post API service and change a few things. So currently getPost, and also postPost return futures containing responses, which in turn contain dynamic bodies. We want to change these responses to contain typesafe bodies, which will be of type in the case of get posts, build list, build post. Build list comes from a package called build collection. So build list, build post. It's just a way for build values to be held inside a list. So let's import even build list. We'll probably have to do that manually. So let's import build collection. That's because get posts returns multiple posts, 100 to be precise. And then for get post, we can just specify a single post to be in the body of the response. And also for post, we're going to specify build post to be the body, because posting also returns the newly added post. And one thing which I have almost forgotten is to change the body type to be the build post, because it no longer needs to be a map. We can use our own classes even for posting something. So build post will be here. Then also inside the Chopper client, as we are instantiating it, we are going to basically remove almost all the interceptors, or actually all of them, because we do not need them anymore. But let's just leave in here the HTTP logging interceptor, because that one is actually pretty useful. It logs interesting stuff to the terminal, to the console. And then, even though we've not yet created that class, but we're going to right now replace JSON converter with BuiltValue converter. And with that, let's move on to creating BuiltValue converter inside a separate file. BuiltValue converter will be the class which will connect Chopper and BuiltValue to work together. Let's create a new file under data. Let's call it BuiltValueConverter.dart. And thankfully, we won't have to start writing this class from complete scratch, because we can actually utilize the already existing code in the JSON converter. So that JSON converter will do the lower level stuff of getting binary data out of the response and converting it to dynamic data, which is somewhat usable in Dart. And we will then only take that dynamic data and convert it to something typesafe to our BuiltValue classes. Also, this BuiltValue converter will take whatever is passed into the request and serialize it so that Chopper can then later turn it into JSON and send it over to the server of the API. So let's import JSON converter. And let's start off with request conversion, because converting requests is a lot simpler than converting responses. We are going to override convert request. And of course, we are building this code to work generically with all the classes implementing BuiltValue, not just with BuiltPost, because this BuiltValue converter should be something that can handle any kind of a build value, whether it's a list of build values or just a single build value class. We are really not gonna do much in the convert request method, because all we have to do here is call super convert request, which will access JSON converter's convert request implementation. And we just wanna say request.replace. And why are we replacing something in the request? Well, as we've already done in the post API service, now calling post, which is kind of a funny name, will make the body to be of type BuiltPost. But of course, requests traveling to the API server cannot have BuiltPost as their body. The body of a request needs to be JSON. So we need to take that BuiltPost, which is currently as a body of the request, and replace it with its serialized version. So what we are going to do is to set body, and now we want to access the serializers of BuiltValue classes. So this actually comes from the serializers file, which is this top level field, serializers. And we want to use these to serialize with, and we're gonna serialize with a serializer for type. So serializers dot serializer for type. And here, if we were not building this BuiltValue converter to work with any kind of a BuiltValue class, we would specify BuiltPost, which would then find the appropriate serializer, which is actually generated in the generated class at the top of the generated file right here. So this is the serializer which will be used. And it would find that serializer and use it to serialize the data. But because we are building this converter to work with any kind of a class implementing BuiltValue, we have to do something different. We obviously cannot just specify BuiltPost directly, but we do not have any kind of a type parameter which would tell us with which kind of a type we are operating inside the request. Because if we take a look at the request definition by hitting F12, we can see that its body is actually dynamic. So how are we going to find out what is the type of the body? Well, we can use runtime type. We can access the runtime type by saying request.body, which we know is some kind of a built value, and then access runtime type. And now the BuiltValue package will find out that this runtime type is actually BuiltPost, and it will turn to this BuiltPost serializer to perform all of that necessary serialization. And then let's also specify an object here which we want to serialize, and that is actually the request.body. And with that done, once we add commas here so that it's nicely formatted, we've just implemented convert request. And if you want to learn at your own pace and read through this multiple times with all of the code commented properly and everything being explained in more detail, check out the written tutorial from the link in the video description, which is gonna take you to resocoder.com. Converting dynamic responses which contain either a list of maps or just a map itself is a bit of a tougher task. We will have to differentiate between the cases of deserializing a list and a single map. And also, what if we explicitly set a method in the chopper service to return a map? Currently, we do not have such a method here because all of the methods return a custom, either a build list or BuiltPost directly. But we could very well have here that we want to return a dynamic response for a certain function. So we have to handle even cases like that, where we do not have a BuiltValue as the return type. So let's start adding all of this code right now by creating a response returning function convert response. Response will have a body type inside it. So convert response. And the type parameters of convert response will be body type and then single item type. It takes in a response instance, so let's just say response. There are two type parameters because the response can contain either a list of objects or just a single object. And actually, if we take a look at the generated code for Post API service, we will immediately see what's going on. When the generated code calls client.send for get posts, it passes in as the first type parameter a build list containing build post, and then the second type parameter is only a build post. So the first type parameter is the list type, and the second is whatever is contained inside that list. When the response should be only a single build post, as is the case with getPost method, the first type parameter and the second one are exactly identical. They are both build posts because there are no lists. The same applies to our conversion method convert response. Body type can be either a build list or it can be identical to the single item type when there are no lists. We will again want to utilize the superclass JSON converter This time because the response by default contains binary data and we want to get the actual dynamic data out of that response, and that will be handled in the JSON converter for us. We won't have to deal with the nitty-gritty low-level conversion ourselves. So let's create a final response, dynamic response, which will be equal to super.convertResponse while passing in the response. So now we have dynamic data, dynamic response inside this first field or first variable because it's inside a function. What we will now want to do is to convert this dynamic response containing dynamic body into a response containing a body which is a BuiltValue data class. And to convert the dynamic body into a typesafe body, we're going to store it inside a final body type. So it will be either a built list or the actual data class itself. Let's call it custom body. And now we'll have to create a function which will take care of this body conversion. So let's create a private function below convert response, and we're going to call it convert to custom object. It will return dynamic. Yes, I know, returning dynamic from converting to custom object. What's up with that? I will get to that later. Let's just for now implement this method. So convert to custom object, which will take in an element of type dynamic. This is the top level element in the response. So it's either the whole list of objects or it's just the one post object from JSON. And we will want this to have also a type parameter, but now only the single item type will suffice. So the first thing which we need to do here is to check if the element, which is again the top level element, so either the list itself or just the single object, if that element is of type single item type. This will happen if the method inside the post API service would say that it wants in fact to have dynamic response body, or maybe it wants to have a response containing map of string dynamic. In this case, if it's a string dynamic, the single item type would match the elements type because it's string dynamic, even by default, without any kind of a conversion. And in that case, we will want to simply return the element without any kind of a conversion because there is really nothing we can convert. So let's now go back to post API service and let's change it back to our beloved build post. Of course, we are not here to just return elements directly. We actually want to handle the deserialization. And if the element is a list, which also applies to a built list, we will want to return. And now I will specify functions here which we have not yet created, but we are going to create them in just a bit. So we want to return whatever is returned from the method call of deserialize list of, and the list will be from the element, and this will also take in a type parameter single item type. And then otherwise, so if the element is not a list, but it's only basically a map of string dynamic, so not element, but else, of course. So else we want to return deserialize, again pass in single item type, and pass in the element, and this time it will return not a built list, but only a BuiltValue implementing class. And that's actually why this method convert to custom object has to return dynamic data, because it can be either of type BuiltList, as is in the first condition, or it can also be of type, for example, BuiltPost for the second condition, or even it can be of type map of string dynamic when we do not want to use BuiltValue for a particular method inside the API service. That's not a problem though, because we'll handle everything through the power of generics later on. So now let's just take a look at the final two methods, which will be deserializeListOf, and let's generate this method by hitting Control and then dot on these squiggly lines. So create method deserializeListOf, and it created it kind of funnily, but after we hit Control Z, it's gonna be taken to a proper form, this generated method. This will return a built list containing a single item type and then of course we need to specify this type parameter also after the name of this method itself. Let's import built list. Again, we need to import it manually from build collection. And then we're gonna rename this element to be something more descriptive like dynamic list. Before we implement deserializeListOf, let's implement the simpler function deserialize. So let's just paste it below. We're gonna call it deserialize, and it's gonna take in not a dynamic list, but instead a map of string dynamic, which will be called value, because that's the single value which we actually want to convert to BuiltPost in this case. And let's even come back to convert the response and set custom body, or actually comment it out just so that we get rid of errors and we can format the code properly so that we can see it. So inside the serialize, we again want to use the serializers for BuiltValue. So we want to return serializers dot deserialize with, but this time we have a type parameter single item type, so we do not have to determine the type at runtime. So instead of runtime type, we're going to say serializers dot serializer for type and specify the single item type without any kind of runtime craziness. And then the serialized object, which should be converted to BuiltPost in our case. So actually we want to remove the built list from the return type of this deserialize function so that it will return only the single item. And the serialized object is value, of course. So now let's save that. And now we can go ahead and implement deserializeListOf, which will just use the deserialize function to deserialize every single element inside the list. So let's return built list containing single item types. So in our case, again, this will be BuiltPost, and we just want to convert every single individual item. So the items which will be put into this built list will be an iterable, and to create an iterable containing the newly converted items of type single item type, in our case BuiltPost, we're going to say dynamic list, which is the parameter of the function here, and we want to map it, and map just creates new instances of a different type for every single item of a list, and we want to map every single element of a list into whatever is there after the element's deserialization. So we're just going to say deserialize, and the value is element. And we should also specify the type parameter explicitly, which will be single item type. Now place a semicolon at the end, add some parentheses so that it's more properly formatted. And now we can finally go up here, and for the custom body, we're gonna set it equal to be convert to custom object, specify the type to be single item type. And what do we want to convert to custom object, which will either return a built list or the single item type itself? Well, we want to convert the dynamic responses body. And once we have our custom body, which is perfectly type safe because even though convert to custom object returns dynamic data, we are immediately implicitly casting it to be the body type. And body type will be, in our case, either a built list of built posts or only a built post itself. And then we just want to return the original dynamic response with replaced body. So we're going to replace body to be the custom body, which holds type safe data. And also, let's not forget to specify the body type for the replacement explicitly. So we're going to say replace body type as the type parameter here. And with this, we have the BuiltValue converter implemented. We just need to go into Post API service and actually import BuiltValue converter over there. So let's again import it probably manually because it doesn't wanna, converter should be its name, of course. And now we can import it with the help of VS Code. So let's import that over here. And again, if this is something that feels overwhelming to you, definitely go check out the written tutorial from the link in the video description, because over there you can really go over this code at your own pace, even with more explanation than I was able to provide in this video, because otherwise this video would get so long that you would get probably distracted and you would not finish this tutorial at all. So definitely go check out the written tutorial from the link in the video description. Alright, so let's now finally go ahead and update the UI. We're gonna start off in homepage, which actually has some errors now in there. That's because we can no longer use dynamic data. We have to use our own custom built posts. So inside the floating action button, as we are calling on pressed, or we are actually reacting to pressed events, we no longer want to call post on the Post API service with a map. We want to pass in here a built post. So let's create a new instance of built post. We're going to call it final new post, and it's going to be equal to built post. So let's import built post in here, and BuiltValue classes are created using that builder. So we're going to specify a builder called B, and on it we then want to call, using a cascading operator, a title will be set to new title, then body will be set to new body. So let's now save that, and as you can see, we are nowhere specifying the ID of the post. We could specify it, of course, ID is equal to 5, but we do not have to, because it's actually not going to have any kind of a meaning, because IDs should be assigned in the backend. So we can pass in a JSON without any kind of an ID. And then of course we want to call post with the new post and not with a dynamic map. As for build body, we're going to change the type held inside the future builder to be a response, which will hold a built list containing built posts. So let's again import build list, and we again have to import it manually for some strange reason. So we're gonna import build collection.dart. And now the future builder's snapshot data will not be just some dynamic data, but it will be a built list containing built posts. So what do we want to do here? Well, as we are calling build posts here, which will build a list view, we no longer want to pass in there posts gotten from decoding the JSON, which is contained inside the body string of the response. No, we want to get rid of this completely, of this JSON decode. even get rid of this comment because it's no longer applicable here. And instead of a list, we're going to have a build list containing build posts, and we're just gonna call it or get it from calling snapshot.data.body, which is now, as you can see, a build list containing build posts, which is definitely amazing. So now we even have to change the parameter type of build posts. So let's just copy build list build post. And of course, I'm going a bit faster through this UI part because it's important, but it's not all that important as, for example, was the implementation of BuiltValue converter. So again, you can get the code from the link in the video description. Let's just change the type of the posts to be build list build post. And now we can no longer access it as dynamic data, but we can access it with calling regular accessor like title and body, which is definitely amazing to have type safety here. And again, we can even access the ID by calling ID, as simple as that. And finally, let's jump over to the single post page, where again we will have to change a few things. The future builder will no longer hold a response dynamic, but a response containing a single build post this time. So let's again import it from model build post.dart. And then again, the single post will not be a map, it will be a build post. So we're gonna again add a type safety here by not converting the body string from JSON, but we are instead going to simply call snapshot.data.body, which in this case will be a build post, because over here we are calling get post on the post API service, which returns a build post in the response. So now we have to change the type of the parameter inside build post to be a built post, of course. So just like that. And now we can call post.title, post.body to access its properties. And we are completely good to go here. So let's just test out if everything works on the emulator. And after we get it running on the device, all the posts will be loaded from the API. We can browse through them here in the list view, so everything is working properly. We can even see what was returned from the API because we are using the HTTP logging interceptor, so all the data is properly gotten. And we can even perform a post request by clicking this floating action button. So we will see that we have posted in a build post which had only a title and a body, so no ID was assigned to it while posting, but then we have gotten a post instance from the post request, and that one already contained the ID. So everything is working as it should. The ID was hypothetically assigned in the backend. It's not really assigned because it's just a placeholder API, so it always returns ID of 101, but still the principle is the same. And then we can even get a single post here. So let's see how it looks like. And it works. Oh, it doesn't work because I have made a typo in the single post page. We should not display post title, but post body. With this minor fix, we will see the proper body and not the title of the post 2 times in the single post page. And with that done, we have finished this tutorial. So if you don't want to miss more tutorials like this, definitely subscribe to this channel and also join the notification squad by hitting the bell button to make sure you grow your Flutter skills, because here on ResoCoder I am determined to provide you with the best app development tutorials and resources out there. If this video helped you to implement the conversion from dynamic data to BuiltValue with the Chopper package, give this video a like and also share it with others who might also benefit from it. Follow me on Instagram, leave a comment if you have anything to say, if you have any questions or suggestions, and see you in the next video.